Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're diving deep into a topic I think we can all relate to, value. But this excerpt you're looking at today on understanding and creating value is going to change how you see everything.
Yeah, it's funny. We use the word value all the time, but do we ever really think about what it means? It's easy to think it's just about the price of something or what it does, but I think this deep dive will reveal that it's a lot deeper than that.
Yeah, for sure. And our source material starts off with a really simple definition. Value is anything that solves a problem, fulfills a need, or creates an experience that matters.
Just for it.
Definitely seems that way on the surface.
It does, but the interesting thing is that value isn't fixed. It's constantly shifting depending on who's looking at it, their context, and even the specific moment in time.
Oh, wow. So it's like a chameleon.
Exactly. And that's what I think is so fascinating about this topic. It's not like there's some magic formula that determines the value of everything.
All right, it's more nuanced than that. So how do we even begin to break down something that's so fluid and dynamic?
Well, the source breaks value down into three dimensions: functional, emotional, and social. Let's start with the functional dimension, since that's usually what people think of first.
Okay, I get that functionality is important, but is there a risk of being too utilitarian? Like just reducing everything to its practical purpose?
Oh, absolutely. But
Uh-huh.
functional value is just one piece of the puzzle. I mean, think about it. A chair's functional value is to provide a place to sit, and a phone's is to communicate. But do we value all chairs and phones the same?
No, of course not.
Exactly. So that's where these other dimensions come in.
It's not just what something does, but how it makes us feel.
Yeah, exactly. Emotional value is all about the experience a product or service evokes. And this is where things get really interesting for anyone trying to create value, because you have to consider those deeper needs and desires people have.
You know, that reminds me of something I fell for recently. I saw this ad for one of those fancy new coffee machines. It was all sleek and high tech. And even though I don't even drink that much coffee, the ad made me feel like I would become some kind of early rising super achiever if I owned it.
Huh, sounds like a classic example of emotional marketing.
Yeah, it totally was.
They weren't selling you a coffee machine, they were selling you a feeling and aspiration.
And I almost bought it before I realized I was being completely manipulated.
And that's why I think understanding this emotional dimension of value is so important, both as consumers and creators.
Yeah, it helps us cut through the noise and figure out what actually matters. You know, this also reminds me of that story about the car company from our
Oh.
source.
Oh, yeah. The one that was struggling, even though they were making decent cars.
Yeah, and they couldn't figure out why no one was buying them.
Right. They were so focused on the features of their cars that they completely overlooked the emotional aspect.
And it wasn't until they shifted their marketing to focus on feelings of freedom, adventure, and style that they finally connected with customers.
Exactly. Sometimes what we think we're selling is totally different from what people are actually buying into.
Okay, so we've talked about functional and emotional value, but what about this social value dimension? I'm not sure I totally understand that one.
Yeah, social value is often overlooked, but it's really powerful. It's all about how something affects our perception of ourselves and how others perceive us.
So is it like trying to impress people with what we own,
Yeah.
like keeping up with the Joneses?
Well, that's definitely part of it, but it goes deeper than just appearances. Think about something like a luxury watch. Functionally, a $10,000 watch tells time the same way a $100 watch does.
But the more expensive one makes more of a statement.
Exactly. It communicates something about the wearer's status, their taste, even their appreciation for craftsmanship.
So it's more than just a practical object.
Yeah. And social value isn't always about luxury or exclusivity either. Remember that example from the source about the company that was obsessed with the internal design of their product?
I think so.
Even though no one would ever see the internal components, they insisted on making them beautiful and well crafted.
Oh, yeah. Why did they care so much if no one was going to see it?
It was all about their values and how they saw themselves. That attention to detail, even in the hidden parts of their product, reflected their commitment to quality.
It was a way for them to show that they cared about doing things the right way.
Exactly. And even if no one else knew about it, it gave them a sense of pride in their work.
So social value can even be about how we see ourselves.
Exactly. It's about our self image and how we want to be perceived by others and ourselves.
This is really fascinating. I'm starting to see the world in a whole new way.
Yeah.
I feel like we've barely scratched the surface, though. I have a feeling we're going to go even deeper.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Now that we have a basic understanding of these three dimensions of value, we can start to see how they interact and how understanding them can help us create genuine value in our own lives.
Yeah.
Kind of crazy when you think about it. We're just constantly bombarded with messages about what's valuable.
Right. Ads, social media, even just walking down the streets, like everyone's trying to get our attention, our money, our time.
Mhm.
So how are we supposed to figure out what's actually valuable amidst all that noise?
And that's what I like about what this source is saying. True value cuts through the clutter. It resonates with us because it solves a real problem or meets a genuine need. It's not just some fleeting trend or marketing hype.
I get that, but how do we go from just understanding value to actually creating it? It
Yeah.
feels like such a big concept. I'm not sure where to even begin.
That's a good question. And the source actually addresses that directly. They say that the source of value comes from each of us, from our individual strength.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's not about some external thing. It's about what we bring to the table.
Exactly. Our skills, talents, perspectives.
That makes sense. But how do we know what our strengths are? It's easy to compare ourselves to others and feel like we don't measure up.
Yeah, that's a really important point. The author actually talks about their own struggle with this. They spent years early in their career trying to imitate others, chasing after external markers of success. But it wasn't until they embraced their authentic self that they started to create something truly valuable.
So they weren't being true to themselves.
Right. And I think a lot of us fall into that trap. We think there's only one right way to be successful or valuable.
But that's not true at all.
Nope. True value comes from understanding what you're uniquely good at and using those strengths to solve problems.
So it could be anything really. Creativity, empathy, technical skills.
Exactly. And when we find that intersection between our passions and the needs of the world, that's where the magic
I
happens.
love that idea.
And to help us figure this out, the source gives us this really cool challenge. They want us to look around us right now and pick any object. Could be your phone, a pen, anything.
Okay, I'm game. I've got this old coffee mug on my desk. It's nothing special, but it's been with me through a lot. What do I do with it?
All right, so now we're going to analyze your mug through the lens of those three dimensions of value. First step, functional value. What does it do? What purpose does it serve?
Well, it holds my coffee, obviously keeps it warm. It's also pretty sturdy. It survived a few drops without breaking.
Okay, great. Now let's go a little deeper. Does this mug have any emotional value for you? How does it make you feel?
You know, it actually does. It might sound silly, but it's kind of a comfort object for me. It reminds me of all the late nights and challenges I've overcome. Plus, it was a gift from a friend, so it always brings back good memories.
That's great. See, even a simple object can have so much emotional value. Now, for the final dimension, social value. Does this mug communicate anything about you to others?
Hmm. That's an interesting question. It's not flashy or anything,
Hmm.
but maybe it says that I'm practical, sentimental, maybe even a little nostalgic.
Awesome. You're starting to see how your mug embodies all three dimensions of value. But now comes the really interesting part.
What's that?
Now we have to think about what's missing. What problems could this mug potentially solve that it doesn't already?
Okay, let me think. It keeps my coffee warm and it has sentimental value. But maybe it could be more environmentally friendly, like made from recycled materials or something.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe you could have a built-in infuser for tea.
Here you go. You're thinking outside the box. You're starting to see how you could enhance the value of something that's already meaningful to you.
This is so cool. But I got to be honest, it's kind of daunting to think about applying this to my work and my life in general.
That's understandable, but creating value doesn't have to be some big grand thing. It can start with small intentional acts, like helping a coworker or listening to a friend, even just baking cookies for your neighbors.
Yeah, that makes it seem a lot less overwhelming.
It's all about making choices that align with what we value.
So how do we start making those choices? How do we actually put this into practice?
Well, the source has a framework for that too. It all starts with understanding our strengths and how we can use them to solve problems and create value. But that's a conversation for another time because we're just about out of time for this segment.
All right, so we've talked about the three dimensions of value: functional, emotional, and social. And we've even touched on how our own strengths can play a role in creating value. But how do we actually put all of this into practice? Give me some actionable advice.
I hear you. It's one thing to understand all these concepts, but the real challenge is applying them in our everyday lives. And the source actually provides a really helpful framework for doing just that.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's the secret formula?
Well, it boils down to asking ourselves three key questions. What problem am I solving? What need am I fulfilling? And what experience am I creating?
Okay, that makes sense, but do my actions really have that much of an impact? It's hard to imagine that everything I do is solving some problem or meeting a need.
I think that's where we can get tripped up sometimes. We think that creating value has to be this big, grand gesture.
Like we have to invent something groundbreaking or start a movement.
Exactly. But it doesn't have to be that way.
So it can be smaller things too.
Absolutely. It could be as simple as helping a coworker who's feeling overwhelmed, or being there for a friend who's going through a tough time. Even something like baking cookies for your neighbors.
I like that it takes the pressure off.
Yeah, and it all goes back to understanding our own strengths. Remember, the author talked about how they finally found success when they stopped trying to be like everyone else?
Yeah, they finally embrace their own unique way of thinking and creating.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the next time you're feeling lost or uncertain about your direction, just ask yourself, what are my strengths? What am I good at? How can I use those things to make a difference?
It's like shifting the focus from external validation to internal self-discovery.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I think this deep dive has been all about. It's not about chasing after money or status or some external measure of success. It's about recognizing the value that we already have within us and using it to make a positive impact on the world.
Wow, this has been such an incredible conversation. I feel like I have a whole new perspective on value and what it means to live a meaningful life.
That's great to hear. And I hope everyone listening feels the same way. Remember, value isn't something you find, it's something you create.
So it's not about what we have, but what we contribute.
Exactly. And with that, I think it's time to wrap things up.
Well, that was an amazing deep dive. I know I learned a lot. What's the one thing we want our listeners to take away from all of this?
I'd say the most important thing to remember is that value isn't a destination, it's a journey. It's about constantly asking ourselves those key questions, looking for ways to solve problems, meet needs, and create positive experiences.
Both big and small.
Exactly.
Well said. It's time for us to go, but we hope you'll keep diving deep into the things that matter to you. Until next time.